Welcome to Coog.com. I'm your host, David Medore. We have John Charles joining us in the studio today. John is telling us that the collapse of Portland's transit system is inevitable. John, you're a very knowledgeable expert in this area for decades. Is that an exaggeration?
I don't believe it's an exaggeration, David. The TriMet board itself has admitted for several years now that simply their cost structure for labor is completely unsustainable. They now spend vastly more in fringe benefits than in wages, actually $1.63 in benefits for every dollar in wages. I've never heard of such a place.
In other words, let's say a train operator, what does a train operator normally get? The person that actually controls in the front of one of these MAX trains.
It might vary, but it doesn't really matter. It's just that for all of their employees, all of their folks they have, for every dollar that goes out the door in salary, $1.63 additional goes out in wages. In most places, goes out in benefits. In most places, benefits are 20 to 30 to 40% add-on to wages. You can't have a structure where it's $1.63 add-on, 163% of wages, and that was only in the most recent audit from last year. The current audit may show a higher number when it comes out any day now. So their personnel structure, compensation structure is unsustainable. They admit that. And on the capital construction side, if they ever expand again, right now the system has been shrinking steadily, about a 14% shrinkage over the last 4 years.
What's been shrinking?
Hours of service out on the street.
You mean of buses?
Buses, trains, all of TriMet service is reported each month.
Even light rail?
Yes. The Yellow Line, when it opened to North Portland 7 years ago, they promised the feds, who funded most of it, that they would run peak hour service every 10 minutes. And they did on opening day. It's been every 15 minutes for years now. That's a substantial underperformance. They don't have the money.
50% cut.
The Green Line that they opened in 2009 has always operated at 33% or more below the level of service they promised.
So you have a public agency that's basically to provide buses and provide light rail. Both of these, they're charging fares, right?
Right.
And I was at a recent CTRAN meeting, and CTRAN is copying TriMet to, when they raise their fares over there, we're raising our fares over here to match them. Why don't they continue to raise their fares if they're running a deficit every year?
The deficit for TriMet is so large, there is really no fare structure that's feasible. Consider the subsidy per trip on their one so-called commuter rail line. They lose about $17 per boarding. If they charge the true cost of that, they would have zero customers. So they have raised fares at a rate in excess of inflation, but they still can't keep up because their problem is on the cost side. The costs are too high.
Well, they have access to payroll taxes, lottery funds. Are there other means for funding this?
Their primary cash cow is a regional payroll tax, and they have already received authorization from the legislature of Oregon to raise the tax rate by 1/100% every January, which they do, and that brings in millions of dollars each year above and beyond what they got the previous year.
And still that's not enough?
No, in the last 8 years, their all funds budget has gone up by more than 100%, but their service has dropped by about 14%. Those conflicting trends, that doesn't work. You can't run the business long term where you spend more and more money to provide less and less service, and you end up alienating essentially all of your customers, all of your supporters, because you promised more service and you're delivering less.
So the cost is going up every year automatically, and the services are actually going down.
Right.
And yet they're continuing to spend more and more. Where's the accountability? I would think that they would see the writing on the wall. They would do something to be able to bring this back into balance so that they can continue to provide services? Why aren't they doing that? They must be doing something.
TriMet has always existed through the good graces of very nice editorial board reviews and
You mean of the local newspapers?
of local newspapers and politicians and business trade associations that purport to represent the businesses who pay the payroll tax. They've always gotten a free ride. It's transit. It's nice. The wheels on the train are shiny. We like trains. All a very thought-free process. The last 2 years, that's changed. They're getting critical editorials written about them. A lot of their friends are now abandoning them because they're cutting service. And if they tried to raise the payroll tax rate again in the legislature, I don't think they would get any support from business trade associations who feel, we've already given you a lot of money and you're cutting service. You know, they're not in for that. So they're losing all of their natural friends. And when they lose their friends, then they're done because they're a huge, ineffective, expensive, bureaucratic structure that's basically imploding on itself.
Well, I would think that C-Tran on our side of the river here would do their due diligence to find out how healthy are they, because right now C-Tran is voting to bring them over here so that they will operate light rail on our side of the bridge. That we're about ready to conduct this experiment on our side to extend them over here. How can that doesn't seem to add up. Why would C-Tran do that?
I don't know why, because here's something for due diligence. C-Tran already has a very effective express bus service going to downtown Portland, and they charge a premium fare. They recover 68% of the operating costs. So there's very little subsidy to what are very good express routes.
So the buses are working well.
Right. Meanwhile, the yellow MAX line that would be extended to Vancouver is the least cost-effective of all of the MAX lines in Portland. It only recovers about 42% of its fares from users, and it's also very slow. So if they were to build it over to Vancouver, they already admit that they would force most express bus riders to get off the bus and transfer it to a slow train, so their time of travel would go from about 16 minutes to 36 minutes. So you would punish them by more than 100% of a time penalty, and you go to a finance model that is clearly inferior. That's really all you need to know so that people in Vancouver and C-Tran should be running as fast as possible from the TriMet model and never let that model cross the Columbia.
John, this seems irrational. Why in the world would we be doing this? It doesn't seem to make sense. What's going on?
It's all politics, and the first thing you have to know is that any publicly financed transit project is not actually about transit. It's about something else. In this case, there's just been this long vision on the south side of the river that we have to have rail. We have to get a beachhead over into Vancouver because we have some manifest destiny to have slow trains going everywhere, despite the fact that society is dispersing all the time. People need more mobility services where slow trains on fixed rails can't take them. And so this is basically the last gasp of a 19th century vision of how urban centers should form.
I talked with people who, when we mention John Charles or Cascade Policy Institute or anyone that basically is bringing light to these issues, they call you light rail haters or tax haters. You know, it's this emotional response, and yet we have tried to invite. We've invited and we try to get people who really want to contend for the other side of this issue. Go ahead and champion this. Tell us why this makes sense. Help us to explain, because we don't want to be censoring out anybody. We need to have a two-way conversation. What's going on here? Why aren't they willing to answer the questions, to have a two-way conversation, to stand up to scrutiny, to be able to tell us how this could make sense?
Because they have the power of coercive government. They don't really need to engage in adult conversations. As far as they're concerned, they're going to do what they want. They'll take the money somewhere. They'll try and avoid public votes. And since they know if they can't really win a discussion with me, They prefer to come up with labels and call me a transit hater without even understanding that I grew up about 20 miles from New York City. I've taken trains and buses and transit all my life. I support transit. I just think that if you have a highly effective and efficient express bus system in Vancouver that we currently have, then it would be foolish to cannibalize that with a slow, massively expensive train system. It doesn't make any sense. And they don't want to hear that, so they prefer to engage in name calling.
Not very productive. We had Jim Moeller here, who is the one person, the one legislator most responsible for funding the CRC light rail tolling project that bring light rail over to here. He talked our legislature into funding $25 additional million, as long as Oregon would add $25 million on their side to fund this. So I asked him after the interview he had here, Jim, would you come in and have a two-way conversation? Can we talk about this? Because you're obviously a champion for this after funding $50 million more. And his answer to me was, I don't know enough about it. I find that just absurd. There are individuals that keep pushing this, and I welcome them. I ask them, please come on. Tim Levitt, Jim Moeller, Sharon Wiley, Larry Smith, Bart Hansen, Jack Berkman, all of these guys. The invitation goes out. Please, one of you proponents, come talk to us. Have a two-way conversation. Answer the questions. It should be able to stand up to scrutiny and help us to understand what are we missing here, because this is something that ought to be debated, because we as citizens ought to be able to hear both sides. We'd really like to hear the proponents actually help us to understand why they're pushing this thing.
We had the same experience back in about 2003, before the Yellow Max line was built. It was a proposal then. So we had an agreement with then City Commissioner Charlie Hales, who is now running for mayor. He was going to be on a discussion table with one of our economists, and then he canceled. And then we rescheduled for another date, and then he canceled a second time. And then his office finally said, actually, there's nothing in it for us to do this, so we're not going to do it. So we asked Congressman Roe Blumenauer, we asked the mayor, we put out a press release. Any public official who is supportive of the North Light Rail line and is willing to defend their views, we have a chair for you at this luncheon debate. The debate will proceed. In the end, we had an empty chair. None of them had enough gumption to show up and defend their project. They don't see it as in their best interest. They know they can't win, and they basically have a hammer and they're going to use everyone else as a nail, and that's their attitude towards all of these projects.
Well, there's two more names. We have three county commissioners here. We have Steve Stewart, we have Mark Bolt. Both of them approved this project, and yet not willing to talk about this. The extension, the invitation goes out, please come talk to us about this project. We don't bite. We'd like to be able to have an intelligent conversation. We'd like to know how this makes sense for Clark County, because we can either put our limited tax dollars into light rail, or we can put them into other projects that may make more sense. Because isn't the, what do you call it, tax increment financing happening over there, and isn't that robbing police and fire and parks and buses and education and all of these other funds in order to put these funds into light rail?
Well, let me put it this way. The local match for the Milwaukee Light Rail boondoggle is $750 million that has to be matched, put up to match the federal money. Every dime of that $750 million could have gone to some other pressing need. A new bridge, schools, roads, lots of other things. The money is all fungible when you peel back the onion. To have appropriated that much money for one slow train to a sleepy little suburb that's only about 4 miles from the east end of the Ross Island Bridge, a city already well served with local semi-express and express bus service
How many miles?
is criminal.
How many miles?
When you cross the Ross Island Bridge, and at the east end of it, as you get onto 99E, there's a sign that says, I think, Milwaukee, 4 miles. So Milwaukee is right adjacent to Southeast. It's almost just part of Southeast Portland. So we're sending this slow train to barely outside of Portland to Milwaukee, a city that already has half a dozen bus routes serving it, local, express, and semi-express, the full meal deal. They already have everything they need, and all those will be cannibalized for a slow train. I mean, really, that's criminal. People, in a better world, people would be going to jail for misappropriating $750 million for something that is completely unnecessary, and which will also take over 100 pieces of property and scatter hundreds of jobs currently in that corridor to far-flung places because they're taking their buildings and right away.
Well, I would sure like to hear from the light rail lovers, from the tax lovers, to come in and share their side of this story. The invitation goes out. Please come help us to understand why this project makes sense. Well, hopefully we'll get a taker. We'll be able to have someone who can be a spokesman for the building of light rail. Come talk to us. Help us understand.
I hope you have better luck than I've had in Portland, because our track record down there is they don't show up. They're afraid to defend their own point of view.
Well, hopefully this issue on the ballot will be able to be a reason why they would show up. If they don't show up, I would think they would forfeit the fight. All right, well, thanks for hanging in there.
All right,
Fight
thank you,
the good fight.
David.
Expose the lights, turn on
Right.
the lights, expose the information, help us to understand. Thank you very much.
All right,
John.
thank you, sir.
Appreciate it. I guess that